All right, welcome to part three. We're going to get into the New Deal, and happy days are here again with the election of Franklin Delano Roosevelt to become President of the United States. So, the election of 1932, Roosevelt is elected in a landslide, promising to fix what was wrong with the United States. He was giving some hope to a place where people didn't have much hope. So Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his personal and political background, he came from a privileged family in New York. He basically never had a job accepted except for when he was elected. So he really never, he was, a golden boy, a silver spoon in his mouth. He paid all of his bills from an allowance that his mother gave him. One thing that that American people didn't know about him was that in 1921 he contracted polio and was paralyzed from the waist down. So he basically, when he had to stand, he had these really heavy braces on his legs that really wouldn't allow him to walk, but he did teach himself how to walk with the braces, but he had to wear those braces when he was standing. So a lot of the pictures you see of him are, seated in a car or something like that, or behind the desk at the Oval Office. So just a question to you guys, this, especially since it is a political season and we're electing a new president, is would you have voted for FDR if you knew that he had polio and couldn't have walked? So the woman behind the president, behind Franklin Delano Roosevelt, is his wife, Eleanor. Eleanor was married Franklin in 1905. She was considered an ugly duckling, but she was tolerated because of her high standing in society. After Roosevelt contracted polio and lost the ability to walk, Eleanor became his legs, basically helping him campaign and run for governor. He helped, like I said, she helped him run for governor of New York in 1928 and president in 1932. She became an advocate for the poor. She also was one of the people that helped form the United Nations after the Second World War. So in the first 100 days, Roosevelt was inaugurated on March 4th, 1933, and 2 days after his inauguration, he called a halt to all banking operations. Then 3 days after that, Congress passed his Emergency Banking Act in a special session. Now, the Republicans were not real pleased about that because they really couldn't do anything because they had their chance to solve the Depression but really couldn't do it. So the Emergency Banking Act got rid of the weak banks. So over 9,000 banks closed during 1933. 9,000 banks had closed during each year of the Depression under Hoover. And basically what the Emergency Banking Act did was offer strong banks loans because they were in the possibility of failing. Also during his first, go back. Oh, crap. How do I go back? All right. So I'll just go over this. The first 100 days, he passes the Glass-Steagall Banking Reform Act that protected savings. It created the FDIC that insured individual savings up to $5,000. It's actually up to, I think, to $250,000 guaranteed today. The act also forbid banks from investing in the stock market and regulated lending policies. Glass-Steagall was actually revoked a couple of years ago. I think President Clinton did it under his watch. He got rid of Glass-Steagall. And with the collapse in 2008, or the economic crisis of 2008, a lot of people have been saying maybe we should bring back Glass-Steagall. Let's see if I can go back. There it is. He abandons the gold standard in 1933. Basically, Roosevelt stops the export of gold and took the United States off the gold standard. So that meant that paper money would no longer be backed by the gold of the United States. Instead, money was valued at what the government said it was. So something that we're still dealing with today. A lot of people want to go back to the gold standard, but where we are in our monetary situation now, there's no way we could back even close to how much money that the United States spends in its budget now. So not really an option. Roosevelt also gets the 21st Amendment passed in 1933, which repeals the 18th Amendment, which means you could go out and get a drink again. He also gets Congress to pass the Securities and Exchange Act of 1934, which establishes the Securities and Exchange Commission that regulates the securities markets. In 1934, he also passes the National Housing Act, which makes mortgages affordable, creates the Federal Housing Administration and the Federal Savings and Loan Insurance Corporation. And basically what that was to do was to ensure that they would stop the tide of the bank foreclosures on family homes and ensure loans on new construction and repair of old homes. He also paid farmers basically to stop growing crops. Like we were talking about, there was a glut of crops, so if you quit growing them, you pay them to quit growing them, then there'll be more demand for what's out there. Asked businesses to establish fair prices on products, and got Congress to pass the first minimum wage and establish a 40-hour work week. Also during this time in the New Deal legislation, you have relief for the poor and the unemployed. It's also known as alphabet soup because this is when you have all of these government programs that are out there that are basically helping employ people that are unemployed. So you have the CCC, the Civilian Conservation Corps, basically helped restore forests and builds bridges, dams, fire outlooks, and fences. The CWA, the Civil Works Administration, builds roads and public buildings, many of which are still used today. Red Rocks is one of those buildings. Well, not buildings, but one of those things that was built by the CWA. You also have, one moment. Sorry about that. Back this. You also have the WPA, which is the Works Progress Administration that hired artists to paint murals in public buildings, organized acting troupes to bring theater to people who had never seen it before. They also went to the South to talk to the dwindling numbers of slaves that had been liberated after the Civil War. A lot of them were dying off, so they wanted to get their stories. You have the NRA, which is created, not the National Rifle Association, but the National Recovery Administration, which was designed to get rid of waste and inefficiency and destructive competition. And you have the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, paid farmers not to farm. And the TVA, we talked about, the Tennessee Valley Authority, built dams in the southeastern states that generated electricity, bringing electricity to a lot of people who had never had it before, and also controlled flooding in those regions. Now, there were some people that weren't real happy with what Roosevelt was trying to do. One of them is the Supreme Court. And they were basically saying that the New Deal was not constitutional. 7 out of the 9 justices on the Supreme Court have been appointed by Republican presidents, and they basically didn't really understand what he was trying to do, so they were trying to kill a lot of his programs, like the National Recovery Act was found unconstitutional in 1935, and the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, was found unconstitutional in 1936. So, another question for you guys, just something to think about, don't need to answer it. Did FDR's New Deal programs work? So there is the second New Deal. Now the second New Deal, one of the biggest programs that come out of the second New Deal was the passage of the 1935 Social Security Act. It had three major components. A retirement fund for the elderly, unemployment assistance, and welfare grants for local distribution. 2 years after it was passed, 21 million workers were covered by the unemployment insurance, and 36 million were entitled to old age pensions. You also have the National Labor and Relations Act, or the Wagner Act, passed in 1935. It was basically United States federal law protecting the rights of most workers in private sectors to organize labor unions and to engage in collective bargaining and to take part in strikes and other forms of activity to support their demands. So basically helping the workers stand up to the industrialists if they were getting taken advantage of. And you also have what the act is also known as, or you have the Revenue Act of 1935, also known as the Soak the Rich tax. Raised the tax rates on incomes up to $50,000. It did little to actually create any tax revenue, and it's kind of turned, or a lot of people looked at Roosevelt and said, well, you've kind of turned on your own class, because Roosevelt came from I guess you would say, came from the wealthy class, and now he was trying to tax them. So you can also see some of these proposals coming out in our current presidential candidates. One in particular that wants to tax people, I believe, making over $250,000, make sure that the 1% pay what they should pay for. So this is not something that is brand new to us as a nation. We've tried it before. It looks like we're going to try it out again. So we'll see what happens. We're going to go ahead and close down this session. So our time is up for this one. So when we get back, or when you go to the next one, we will be on session 3, and it will be part 4. So I will see you guys momentarily.